Hello everyone! This is Mathfinder, the home for every math nerd's Pathfinder optimization needs. If you're new here, welcome, and we're so glad to have you. If you've been here before, welcome back, and thank you so much for continued support. Today, I wanted to talk about the Slayer, one of two classes that Paizo revealed in the playtest package that came out last week. The two classes are Daredevil and Slayer, and I will be covering the Daredevil later, but I wanted to get into the Slayer first because that's the one that really excites me. The Slayer's fantasy is being a monster hunter. A little bit of overlap with the Ranger and Thaumaturge thematically, but not quite so much that the class is redundant. I think it's a really cool, narrow, and niche fantasy, and I think they've done such a good job representing it, which I will get to in my final thoughts near the end of this video, how I think the Slayer does with representing the overall fantasy. I have seen some mixed reactions to the class online. I have seen some people talking about how it has way too much overlap with the Ranger, and honestly, the summary is that I don't think it does. Thematically, it covers some of the same spaces, but ultimately, the Monster Hunter is a unique fantasy, and the way it's being expressed by this class hasn't been done in Pathfinder before. And mechanically, it's going to play very distinctly from any of the classes being compared to. So today I'll do a deep dive into the Slayer, based mainly on reading it really in depth and talking to others about it. I have not yet had a chance to playtest it. I'll probably make a shorter video talking about it once I've had a chance to playtest. Let's get into it now. First, let's talk broadly about the Slayer, class chassis, and thematics. So here is the flavor text for what a Slayer is. More or less, they're a character that hunts down large, dangerous threats and takes care of them, and they do so by using a specialized arsenal of weapons and tools. And I understand that in the broadest sense, this has a lot of overlap with the Ranger, but honestly, once you delve into it, it doesn't really. The Ranger is kind of a survivalist, and any monster hunting tends to be kind of a sideshow in terms of their thematics. You can, of course, use a Ranger to build a good monster hunter, but the Slayer as a dedicated monster hunting class is something Pathfinder doesn't have, and I think it's a cool niche to be exploring. Likewise, there's a little bit of overlap with the Thaumaturge. You have this arsenal of tools that sort of evokes the same image as the Thaumaturge's implements. But the Thaumaturge's implements and their esoterica, they operate off of sympathetic magic, occult magic, whereas the Slayer, unless you pick the magical feats that give you occult spellcasting, there's nothing inherently magical about them. They're just really clever about using the right tools at the right time. Think if the Ranger is like Gotrek Gurneyson from Warhammer, and then say the Thaumaturge is like the Belmonts from the Castlevania games. The Slayer is more like the Witcher, somewhere in between those two fantasies, not explicitly relying on occult magic, but instead relying on actual knowledge of the monsters they're hunting, and not really a survivalist or a tracker. They have a pretty specialized niche that they're delving into, and that's what the Slayer is going for. For the class chassis, they have strength or dex as their key attribute, and they have 10 HP martial scaling. Most of their progression is fairly standard for martials. They get weapon proficiency at levels 1, 5, and 13 up to master, armor proficiency in light and medium armor at levels 1, 11, and 19 up till master, and then they get weapon and greater weapon specialization at levels 7 and 15. They have Master, Expert, Master progression in Fortitude, Reflex, and Will, respectively. They don't have any particularly good saves. Their class DC progression matches a Thaumaturge. They go up to Master by level 17. And they do get to go up to Legendary in Perception. Not as fast as the Rogue, who gets it at level 13, but they get it by level 17. And finally, they have an Omnilore. They have monster lore, which can be used to make recon knowledge checks on any non-humanoid about a lot of their combat-relevant statistics. And this scales at levels 1, 3, 7, and 15 up till Legendary. Notably, at level 5, they also get Assurance and Automatic Knowledge for this specific lore. Unlike the Thaumaturge, they don't get Dubious Knowledge, but they do get these two feats, which is nice for using in Monster Lore because it might help you recall knowledge pretty consistently when it comes to equal or lower level foes, and automatic knowledge is really nice to have as well. Now, let's start talking about their unique mechanics. And their unique mechanics do get weird, so this is going to be a pretty long section. First, we will be talking about the Quarry mechanic. So marking a Quarry is pretty central to the Slayer's damage slash defense slash whatever utility they're aiming for. And I do want to note right here, this is not the same as the Ranger's Hunt Prey. Thematically, it's gonna cover a lot of the same ground, and out of combat, it has similar mechanical impacts in that it gives you a circumstance bonus to tracking or perceiving this foe. But once you get into combat, they're pretty distinct in how they operate. Firstly, marking a Quarry is not even a combat action. Hunt Prey is a single action you can take in combat. Marking a Quarry explicitly is not. It's an exploration activity you get to take before combat starts, and it takes 10 minutes to do, and once you've done it, you have all of these benefits once combat has started. There are ways to compress it into a combat length action slash reaction slash free action, but it is not something that you can get just by default the way Hunt Prey works. There's a level 2 reaction, Instant Enmity, that lets you use Mark Quarry in combat once an enemy takes a hostile action, but it's once per day. And at level 10, it takes an additional feat to make it once per 10 minutes. Then there's a level 19 class feature, not feat this time, called Fated Foe, that lets you mark a Quarry as a free action only if you are dropped to 0 HP. So already you can start to see that this is not something you can count on doing in combat. Until level 10, you'll only have it once per day, even though you spent a feat on it. The whole goal of marking a Quarry is to reward you for taking proactive measures against the thing you're hunting. And I really love that, because Hunt Prey for the Ranger is kind of just seen as this action tax that Rangers take. Its out of combat portion doesn't really get much attention, even though it can be relevant in some campaigns, because tracking is pretty useful to have if your GM is rewarding it. But marking Quarry is specifically a out of combat action. You have to pay attention to what your GM is telegraphing. You have to ask questions, you have to look for footprints, you have to use feats like Survey of Wildlife just to make sure you're getting to use this. And this sort of engagement is a good thing to be rewarding. It's the mechanic that rewards the fantasy the class is going for. And notably, it does have a restriction. It only works on creatures that are of an equal or higher level than you. It does not work on lower level creatures. There is a feat at level 2 called Pack Slayer that lets you use it on a group of 3, up to 3, enemies if they're of a lower level than you. Notably, that feat applies a restriction to the claim trophy feature, which we'll talk about later, but you can only claim a trophy from one of those 3 enemies, not all 3. So at this point, you can already see that this is making itself something distinct from the Ranger. It has a completely different gameplay loop. You're not spending it as an action tax mid-combat. And what benefits does it give you? What do you get for using this exploration activity? Well, for starters, you get the +2 circumstance bonus to track this enemy, just like the Ranger would for their Hunt Prey out of combat, but you also get this bonus to monster lore and society checks to recall knowledge, and that's really cool. You're not intelligence as a key attribute, so it's really nice to just get this bonus to catch you up to, say, a wizard or investigator in your recall knowledge alongside your scaling lore. Why do you get it for both monster lore and society? Monster lore works on non-humanoid enemies, society works on humanoid enemies. So as a Slayer, I would be interested in pumping society up at least a little bit if you're expecting to face humanoid enemies, especially because some of your other features may not work on them. Secondly, each subclass has a unique benefit against your marked Quarry. Now, again, I'm not making the best case here for this not being the same as Hunt Prey, because that's what Hunt Prey does, right? Enables your subclass benefits as a Ranger. But I promise you, it is different. When you do look at the subclasses, you will see that the benefits you get against your Quarry are narrower and more themed for a monster hunter, whereas your more generic benefits like your damage steroid if you take the damage focus class, or your defensive boost if you take the defense focus subclass, all of those are more generic and not worrying about your Quarry that much. The Quarry is designed to reward more specific play patterns that you take. And as part of rewarding those specific play patterns, you also have feats that grant additional benefits just against your Quarry. So that is the first major feature of the Slayer. And this feature is not that weird by itself, but now from here on, the Slayer's features get much more involved and weirder and more unique by Pathfinder standards. And I think they're really cool. Trophies are your next major feature. They are a direct payoff to your Mark Quarry feature. When you drop a Quarry, so long as you have access to its remains, you can now claim a trophy from this Quarry. And this is a strange feature. This is unique in its design space within Pathfinder. I have never really seen anything quite like it. Generally speaking, Pathfinder classes fall into two different broad buckets. You either get weaker as the day goes on because you're attritioning away resources with the option to conserve it, meaning you have a low performance and then you spike when you use all of those resources all at once, or you have a relatively steady performance throughout the day. You might have ups and downs within a combat, say the way Exemplars and Swashbucklers do, but throughout the day, your average performance for each combat is largely gonna stay the same, beyond perhaps items. So the Slayer's trophy mechanic is sort of unique in that as the day goes on, or as the adventure goes on even, you might find yourself getting a little bit stronger. At a bare minimum, you will get more versatile, and if you know what to do with that versatility, you're gonna feel like you get a lot stronger as the adventure goes on. So let's see how the trophy mechanic works, because it is weird. A trophy is defined by three aspects. First, it has all of the traits of the creature you claimed it from, except its rarity and size. Secondly, it is associated with all of the damage types that creature could either deal with its strikes, or its non-spell abilities, like say a Dragon's Breath weapon, or it was immune to. Lastly, it acquires any tradition traits that creature had, and if that creature didn't have any, by default it will be occult in nature. I will note here, I would have preferred this to be primal, that is, the Slayer actually knows how to work with the material magic that the creatures all inherently have, rather than it being occult, which means to at least some extent you're sharing that sympathetic magic niche of the thaumaturge, but honestly it's not a big deal because it's fine for it to default to occult. Now these are the three things that every single trophy is going to have. So anytime you claim a trophy from a creature, you should note down all of these. And then there's a secret fourth thing. The trophy is sometimes tangibly associated with the creature you claimed it from in ways that are not these above three. And these can be somewhat arbitrary. There's only one subclass really that seems to interact with this mechanic at all. I'm not sure if Paizo intended that or if this is sort of like an A/B test. I really like that subclass does it. I do wish others did it too. And I will be talking about those specific mechanics as they come up. But yes, there are some feats, features, and subclass abilities that specifically refer to things the creature could do that were not its traits, not damage types, and not its spell tradition, and it lets you either directly use some of those abilities or tune your abilities based on something that creature had. So that is what a trophy is. But what do you do with trophies? When you make daily preparations, you can use a trophy to reinforce your arsenal. Each trophy can be used to reinforce one tool, and what a tool is, I will define in a moment. But remember, you can have many, many trophies, so you choose which ones will reinforce which tool. Every single Slayer will have a minimum of one tool that it's allowed to reinforce this way via its subclass. Your subclass is called your signature tools, and every single one of them will give you at least one reinforced benefit. There are also feats that will grant you more tools with reinforced benefits. Some of them are subclass specific, Some of them are subclass agnostic. So overall, the idea is that when you make your daily prep, you take these trophies, you use them on your tools, and then those tools acquire an additional benefit, usually associated with the trophy you gave to those tools. You might take a damage dealing tool and make it deal extra damage based on the damage that the trophy could do. You might take a tool that was capable of resisting damage and give it resistance to a certain trait that was associated with the trophy. How many tools you have to be able to reinforce does vary, and I will talk about that more at the end of this video when you should have a better picture of how the class functions overall. And notably, anytime you claim your trophy, you can immediately use it to reinforce any one of your tools. You can't change any other decisions you made at the start of the day. So let's say you started the day and you had, 5 trophies from your previous adventures, and you used 2 of them to reinforce your 2 tools. Now you beat a higher level foe, you claim a trophy from it, you can use that to replace one of the 2 that you had done at the start of the day. This means you actually have some midday versatility as well. If, for example, you face a fire elemental and you know there's more elementals coming up later, you can take that fire elemental and use it against those creatures later. If you expect to face more fire elementals, you might use this to reinforce your defensive benefits. If you're expecting to face ice elementals, you might use this to reinforce your offensive benefits. And finally, at level 1, you get to start with 1 trophy. This trophy is arbitrarily chosen. You don't associate it to any specific creature, and you don't need GM fiat to do it. You just go to those 3 things I mentioned that every trophy has, and just pick an option for each of them. If you start at higher levels, you get to start with more of these. For every 2 levels you have past the first, so 3, 5, 7, etc., you will get 1 additional trophy that you start the adventure with. So this is only for starting at a higher level. If you're leveling up as normal from 1 to 10 or whatever, you will have the 1 trophy you started with at level 1, and then the remaining trophies will be things you claimed during your adventure. Overall, I really love this. The fact that these trophies are tangibly associated with creatures is just fantastic to me. When I first heard about the Slayer, I was a little bit worried that trophies are just going to be flavor in the same way that the exemplars icons are. That is to say, you have a weapon trophy, an armor trophy, a helmet trophy, whatever, and you flavor it as having acquired it from a past slaying, but you don't actually acquire them from the creatures you have beaten. Thankfully, that's not the case. Paizo made sure to actually build in this gameplay loop into the Slayer, and I'm all for it. I think there's a real benefit to having things like this be tangible rather than all being gamified and flavor. To me, the trophy is just being flavor for something that's more similar to the Thaumaturge's implements or the exemplars icons would have been like saying the alchemist doesn't get alchemical items. They just get things that are flavored and have the alchemical traits, but are otherwise just class feats or spell-like abilities. I wouldn't have been a fan of that. So I'm really glad that trophies are tangible, trophies are real, and trophies are things you acquire as you play the game. And you'd think that with Mark Quarry and trophies, we're done. That's enough to define a fairly unique gameplay loop for the Slayer. But it's not yet done. There's one more fairly unique feature, and I think this is sort of what sets the Slayer apart from other classes even more, because without looking at On the Hunt and the Relentless trait, the Slayer can still be argued to be like a glorified ranger class archetype. But once you incorporate this last bit of cool, unique features that the Slayer gets, I don't think there's any argument about it. I think the Slayer is a unique class that deserves the design space it's getting. So On the Hunt is a reaction. By default, it triggers when your quarry is critically hit or any creature within 60 feet drops to 0 HP. Note the distinction. The critical hit only needs to apply to the quarry, but the 0 HP drop can apply to any creature, quarry or not. This is really clever. The quarry is an enemy of an equal or higher level than you. When you encounter such enemies, that means there are few foes on the battlefield, and that means they're not dropping to 0 HP a lot. But with good teamwork, you can guarantee these critical hits, you'll gain the benefits of On the Hunt. Conversely, when there's many foes on the battlefield, you might not have a quarry at all, which means any of your features that key off of having a quarry just don't function. But that's okay, because this benefit is going to trigger a lot every single time an enemy drops 0 HP, so you'll be getting this benefit a lot more. And that, in my opinion, is great design, because now there's this back and forth where when you're getting a lot of the benefits of having a quarry, you don't need On the Hunt as much. And when you're not getting the benefits of the quarry, you're getting a lot of On the Hunt to compensate. So great design here. So what is the benefit of On the Hunt? Well, it's a really strong benefit. You become quickened, and you can use this action to step, stride, or use a relentless action. And Relentless is a trait that a whole lot of Slayer abilities have. So really, a lot of the time, you're just going to feel like you have 4 actions when you've used On the Hunt. And again, there's that interplay to this. When you have a quarry, On the Hunt will trigger less, but that's okay because you're getting all these benefits of having a quarry. But when you don't have a quarry and are not getting those benefits, you're going to have 4 actions per turn very, very frequently. At level 4, you get the option to do On the Hunt as a free action when you see your quarry while rolling initiative. At level 6, you get the option to use this reaction if your circumstance bonus to AC from a shield or from your subclass, we'll get to that, cause an attack to miss. At level 8, you can get this if your quarry critically hits you. At level 10, you're allowed to pick an additional reaction that can only be used to go On the Hunt, which then frees up your other reactions for other uses you might have, such as shield block. And finally, at level 20, you can pick a capstone feat that says, when your turn ends, you automatically go On the Hunt. Now, I do have a little bit to say about the sort of flooding of the reaction economy with On the Hunt, but more on that at the end. But we should now talk about what the Relentless trait even does, because that's a pretty important part of, am I going to feel like I have a 4 action economy, or am I going to feel like I have a slightly worse haste spell on me? And the truth is, you're going to feel like you have a 4 action economy a lot of the time. Every single subclass is going to have at least 1 activity with the Relentless trait. A lot of good feats have the Relentless trait, and I will be showing some of them off on the next slide. So you're going to feel like you have a 4 action economy so long as you feel like using any of your feats, and why wouldn't you? That's what marshals use all the time. Now let's evaluate some of the Relentless feats, because a conversation about On the Hunt and Relentless is not complete without it. To be clear, I'm not about to present an exhaustive list of such feats. This is a snapshot. In fact, later in this video, you're probably going to see other Relentless options as well. First up, Crossbow Slayer. And despite the name, if you read the second sentence, I think it's intended to allow reload on all weapons, not just crossbows. It works with guns and slings too. What the feat does is simple. The reload action, the interact action you take to reload, now has the Relentless trait, which means you can use it while quickened from On the Hunt. Ignore the special bar for that Consecrated Panoply subclass, we'll get into that later. Here's the thing, reload compression is not unique. Other classes get it, gunslingers get it, rangers get it, but I would argue this is the most pure form of reload compression we can get. It's the closest you're gonna get to feeling like you have a 4th action that lets you reload. Why is that? Well, think about it. Running reload says you can stride, step, or sneak, followed by a reload, and then take your remaining 2 actions as you wish, in whatever order, before or after running reload. So, in theory, that's 4 actions. Stride, step, or sneak, reload, and 2 actions. But what if you didn't need to stride or step, And what if you were not hidden enough to sneak in the first place? Then you really only took 3 actions. In theory, you had 4 actions, but you didn't really do anything with one of them. Likewise, if you're a sniper gunslinger, but the enemy is already off guard to you because your friends are good teammates and one of them tripped the enemy. Yes, hide plus reload is technically 2 actions, but if you take a strike immediately after it, the hide might end up having done nothing. So a lot of the reload compression, while good, exists to iron out inconveniences within the 3 action economy, but doesn't actually make you feel like you have 4 actions all the time. This is much less conditional. If you are quickened by On the Hunt, which should happen frequently, I'd say at least 50% of the time at the lower level ranges, and by high levels, it should happen close to 100% of the time, and literally 100% of the time if you take that capstone feat that I talked about earlier. Well, if you're quickened, you just get to spend that action on a reload, and then your remaining 3 actions are actual 3 actions that you can take in any order for any actions or activities you like without any constraints. They're not locked into stride, step, or sneak. They're not locked into hide. So as long as you're able to make good use of On the Hunt, this is the best form of reload action compression in the game, bar none. Now that as long is doing some heavy lifting in that statement. I won't know how it feels until I see it in playtest, but at least on paper, this looks really good to me. This looks to me like this feat alone would make Relentless fantastic. But this feat is not all you get. Here's another one, Sudden Pounce. This is just a sudden charge, but rather than stride, strike, you do long jump, strike. So you will first stride, then you'll make your athletics check to make a jump as far as you can, and then you will make a strike, provided you're in melee range of an enemy. It's not hard to get to the point where your jump distance is as long as a stride would be in a lot of cases, so it might cover a little less than, say, a sudden charge would, because you might have, say, a 40-foot movement speed and sudden charge 80 feet to strike someone, but this is still going to feel almost as good as sudden charge in the amount of distance you cover. It also makes the enemy off guard to the strike if you leap further than 15 feet, which is really easy to do. And it's relentless, which means a lot of the time this is going to feel like a 1-action sudden charge, not a 2-action sudden charge. So right at level 1, we have 2 bangers, 1 ranged build enabler and 1 melee build enabler, and it only gets better from there. Next up is Saltstone. This is a more situational feat than the previous 2. It requires a free hand, it's 1 action with the Relentless trait, and for the next minute, it gives you the Ghost Touch rune to damage incorporeal creatures with, and it automatically turns off regeneration on your Quarry. This is fantastic. First off, the Ghost Touch rune applies to all creatures, not just your Quarry. This means you never have to worry about putting a Ghost Touch rune on your weapon or putting an Astral rune on your weapon. At level 7 or 8, you could pick something else that you think is more relevant, like the Rooting rune, or the Fearsome rune, or the Grievous rune at level 9, or whatever you prefer. You don't have to lock yourself into the Astral rune, which many view as an almost mandatory pick because of how bad it feels to fight ghosts otherwise. For the low cost of a 2nd level feat, you just don't have to worry about it. And if you're fighting your Quarry, it just turns off their regeneration, which is amazing. Boss fights against foes with regeneration tend to be scary because they usually have regeneration values so big that if you don't turn them off, it's just reversing all your work. And 1 extra turn from a boss is sometimes all it takes to start a TPK. You never have to worry about that with Saltstone around. And finally, it has the Relentless trait, so it's gonna feel like it costs 0 actions. In fact, despite needing a free hand, this is worth it on 2-hand weapon users. Just drop it, which is a free action, use your quickened action to Saltstone and regrip your weapon, and you still have 2 actions left to say Sudden Pounce onto your foe. So this is just a great feat overall. This is, in my opinion, how situational options should be designed. The narrower the situation you're addressing, the more dominating your position in that situation should be. And this feat is a great example of that. Next up is another build enabler. Shifting Hunt. When you interact to change the configuration of a combination or modular weapon, or to change your grip on a two-hand weapon, like say a bastard sword, that action gains the Relentless trait for you. Again, this is great. It's like reload action compression, but for combination weapons or two-hand weapons or modular weapons. Now, modular weapons are not great, so I don't know that this is going to change much in that regard, but combination weapons, they sort of have the problem where they're versatile, but then it's a little action intensive to switch between them unless you're really good at sequencing your turns. This takes away that problem. Likewise, for two-hand weapons, you might find yourself, say, opening in the two-hand configuration, letting go at some point, say, to drink a potion or grab an enemy, and then never really bothering to put your hand back on. This makes it all the more likely that you get to do so. And notably, take a look at that special tag. It is subclass specific, but if you have the Blood-Seeking Blade subclass, if you have one of these weapons, each configuration can have a different reinforcement. This is fantastic. This means you can use one trophy to reinforce one mode of the weapon and another to reinforce the other mode. And now you have a lot of coverage. If you're facing both cold and fire elementals in the same day, one of them is designed to counter one, the other is designed to counter the other. Honestly, Shifting Hunt is a really cool feat, and the biggest thing is it reminds me of Bloodborne, and that makes me so happy. So I really hope this feat makes it into its final release, and so does its follow-up, Shifting Combination. This is basically double slice for combination weapons. You make an attack in one mode, you switch, and you make an attack in the other mode. It works identically to double slice otherwise, but the nice thing is because it has Relentless, it flows into your action economy really, really well. For example, let's say you're quickened on both of your first two turns. You might, say, take a shot from a distance, then use your Relentless action to shift into the melee configuration, then close the gap and make a strike, and then on a future turn, you might use Shifting Combination to make a strike, switch into the range configuration, make a range strike, and then back out of melee and still have an action left over. There's just so many opportunities this opens you up to. And again, it feels like playing Bloodborne, but in tabletop role-playing game form. And that makes me really happy. And finally, Terrifying Bloodlust. This is a level 18 feat. And if you evaluate it without the Relentless trait, it would be quite bad. Think about it. It's a will save that does Frightened 1, 2, or 3 based on your class DC. Not that good, even for one action. But with the Relentless trait, it's going to feel like a zero action ability. So all in all, I think On the Hunt and Relentless do an excellent job of making this class feel like a flurry of actions and movement and cool things going on. And they succeed at all of their tasks. Relentless takes build enabling taxes and makes them feel like a true fourth action rather than a discount 3.5 action. It takes feats like Sudden Charge and Double Slice and upgrades them to not just feel good, but to feel really, really excellent because they sometimes feel like one of the actions is a free action. It takes situational effects like Salt Stone and makes them feel free even in the situations they were already good in, which incentivizes you to take them in the first place. And it takes effects that would be mediocre for their action costs, but makes them worth using because they feel free. Overall, I'm a big fan of On the Hunt and Relentless. Now, let's finally talk about the Slayer's subclasses, their signature tools. The Slayer has 4 options for their subclass. At level 1, you will get an initial benefit and a slaying technique. Your slaying technique will always have the Relentless trait, which is a pretty crucial part of evaluating them. And then at level 1, some of the subclasses get an additional feature on top, and the value of that can vary. In some cases, it's pretty good. In others, it's only good in terms of what feats reference it. And in still others, it is just kind of a ribbon. I will talk about each of those in the subclass. Finally, at level 7, you get your Specialized Arsenal, which is your follow-up subclass feature. At level 11, you are allowed to pick a second signature tool, but you will only gain its level 1 benefits, not the level 7 one. First up, let's talk about the Blood-Seeking Blade subclass. This is the damage-dealing subclass. This is what you use to feel like a Bloodborne character. And this is, in my opinion, an excellent subclass. For starters, your Blood-Seeking Blade is a tool you choose during your daily preparations, and there are feats that reference it. You've already seen one, Shifting Hunt, where the two different modes of your combination or two-hand weapon can be treated as two different weapons for the purposes of reinforcing it. Now, of course, the value of that depends on the value of the reinforced techniques. So let's start looking at what the subclass actually gives you. First up, the initial benefit. Physical damage that you deal to your quarry ignores a certain amount of resistance to that physical damage type. This is niche, but pretty nice to have. Like reducing resistance by, say, 2 to 5, depending on the number of striking runes you have, that's pretty substantial when you're running into a resistance. But of course, this is niche. It only applies to things that resist your physical damage, and only when they're quarries. That is fine though, because this may be niche, but your reinforced benefit is actually not niche at all. The first strike you make in a turn, whether to your quarry or not, deals an additional 1d6 damage of the same type as your trophy. This scales by another 1d6 at levels 11 and 19. This also puts into perspective Shifting Hunt that we talked about earlier. Since Shifting Hunt lets you put two different reinforced benefits on the two halves of your weapon, you can do some really interesting stuff with this. For example, you might have a Bastard Sword, which has the two-hand and one-hand modes, and one of the modes has fire as its trophy damage type, the other has cold. Things that are immune to fire often are weak to cold. Things that are immune to cold are very often weak to fire, and that means you have a nice duality going on where you're never caught with a weapon that doesn't trigger a weakness against these two types. Likewise, let's say you're expecting to run into incorporeal creatures. Now, your initial benefit is already good at reducing the amount of resistance the enemy has. On top of that, let's say you use the two-handed mode of your Bastard Sword, you would be pretty good at overcoming resistances because D12s do 2 higher damage on average per weapon damage die than a D8. And now, if you, say, put an additional bunch of D6s of force or spirit damage on top of it, suddenly you're dealing substantial damage to a target that is supposed to be resisting most of what you do. So this would make the Slayer really, really good at ignoring resistances or bypassing weaknesses, provided that you are clever about using your trophy for it proactively. Will you be as good at exploiting weaknesses as a Thaumaturge? No, because a Thaumaturge is exploiting them via just bullshit sympathetic magic, right? But I will note that Thaumaturge is exploiting them as their damage steroid. The Thaumaturge's damage comes from exploiting weaknesses. Your damage, in this case, comes from your D6s, like a Precision Edge Ranger, but you're also good at either bypassing resistances or exploiting weaknesses, and that makes you pretty good in my opinion. Then we have your slaying technique. This is basically a modified version of Hunter's Aim, the Ranger feat. It's a 2-action strike, it can be melee or range, it ignores the concealed condition, and it has a +2 circumstance bonus to the attack roll. This is pretty good on the Slayer. On the Ranger, Hunter's Aim is a situational, leaning to mediocre feat. The problem with the Ranger is that because of Hunt Prey, they don't always have all 3 of their actions on a turn. Sometimes they're paying the action tax, and on top of it, they have fantastic action compression like Hunted Shot and Twin Takedown that Hunter's Aim has to compete with. And that means it's pretty situational. The Slayer doesn't have such action taxes to begin with, and in fact, slaying techniques have the Relentless trait, which means you will sometimes, often, once you get to mid-high levels, have a 4th action that can contribute to this 2-action strike. So a lot of the time you will feel like you have a one action version of Hunter's aim, and that is really good. That means the first strike on your turn is often going to feel as good as a fighter or gunslinger. That makes you good at crit fishing. That makes you good at using deadly or fatal weapons. That makes you good at exploiting feats that give you crit riders. That makes you good at exploiting property runes that give you crit riders. So the Slayer with this subclass can be a good damage dealer that has the option to crit fish if desired. And finally, at level 7, your specialized arsenal gives you a whole bunch of useful features. You get critical specialization effects. You can now reduce non-physical resistances too from your initial benefit, not just physical damage that you deal. And finally, you gain a free property rune. At a baseline, Fearsome is a good, generically good rune to have because you can crit fish with it with your slaying technique and often debuff enemies. Returning and shifting runes are good situational options to have. Notably, the shifting rune, I think, doesn't work with the shifting hunt and shifting combination feats I talked about earlier. I do wish it worked there because it feels like thematically it should, and I will mention that in my playtest. All in all, Bloodseeking Blade is a fantastic subclass. Next up, Chymist, Chemist, Chemist's Vials. First, you gain alchemical crafting. This is largely a ribbon feature. If you have a campaign with a lot of downtime, you will get some marginal use out of it and craft potions. Then there's your initial benefit. Once per hour, you can use a one-action drink your potion activity that lets you detect your quarry as a precise sense for 10 minutes. This is really powerful in the circumstances it comes up. When you're facing an enemy that's supposed to be able to go invisible very efficiently or hide from you very efficiently, this turning it off is a big deal. That being said, this is really niche, and I don't think a subclass should have its initial feature be something this niche. Now, the reinforced benefit is a little less niche. You can gain one special vision ability that the creature had when you claimed the trophy from it, and you can use that ability. This is a really cool ability, and the Chemist Vial subclass is what I was talking about when I said that trophies generally have these three categories of things: traits, damage types, and traditions. And then sometimes they just reference the creature in tangible other ways. The Chemist Vial has, as far as I saw, every single one of those features that references the creature's stat block directly, and it's really cool, and I would like to see more of that on the other subclasses too. But again, this is a bit of a situational ability. Gaining special senses, while it can be relevant, is not always the most relevant thing. Next up, your slaying technique is a 2-action, once per minute, cantrip scaling cone of fire damage. And that's really mediocre. This is basically a once per minute cantrip. As always, slaying techniques have the Relentless trait. Sometimes, a lot of the time, this is going to feel like a 1-action cone of fire. Is that good? I don't think so. I think you have a lot of other good things to do with your Relentless options, given whatever feats you pick. But again, the reinforced benefit in this case, rather than deal fire damage, you can deal one of the non-physical damage types of the trophy you reinforce this with. And this can be a good way to exploit weaknesses, but it's not great regardless. Like, if you think about it, Bloodseeking Blade is going to be almost as good as you at exploiting weaknesses. I guess you will get to do it on a basic save, so you'll do it more frequently, but I don't know. This is overall a lackluster feature. These are not bad. I think the Chemist Vial subclass is fine, and as you later see with certain feats, you can build this up to be pretty cool in the right campaigns, but I think this is a middle-of-the-road subclass for the Slayer. And finally, your specialized arsenal, which it just takes the above two and makes them once per round rather than effectively once per combat like they were. Not a big upgrade. Your slaying technique at least is now going to trigger weaknesses every round of a combat instead of just once, but this is a marginal benefit. I think the Chemist Vial is unfortunately a pretty medium subclass. That being said, it is thematically very cool. Thematically, this is the Witcher subclass, so I really hope they pay more attention to it and boost it up a little. And I hope that this little thing where the Chemist Vial is the only one that directly references the stat block in non-standard ways gets extended to all other Slayers. Next up is the Consecrated Panoply subclass, and it's not great. It is by far the worst of the 4 subclasses in my opinion. It starts out great. The initial benefit is a +1 status bonus to saves against your Quarry. That's pretty good. Quarries will typically be bosses or mini-bosses. At worst, they'll be on-level enemies. A +1 status bonus against such enemies means crit failing less often. This is pretty good, if a bit niche, because you won't always have a Quarry, and you will often have enemies who are not your Quarry, even when you're fighting your Quarry. But the reinforced benefit makes it even better. It applies to creatures with the trophy's trait and spells with the trophy's traditions, and that is really good if you're good at selecting your trophies for the day for reinforcing this. In particular, if a campaign has a strong theme, this will feel like a near unconditional +1 status bonus to saves. If, for example, you're in a campaign that takes place heavily in a forested area, you might go for traits like Animal, Beast, and Fae. You might go for the Primal Tradition, and that's going to make you feel like you have a +1 status bonus to the majority of saving throws you make. And that's where the good stuff about this subclass ends. Your slaying technique is basically quick draw for daggers. You have hunting spikes in your panoply, and these are just daggers that have been reflavored, and you do have unlimited ammo with them. You can sanctify your strikes holy or unholy, and you can quick draw them as a relentless action. This is all feeling like it's coming together well. You can probably make a good switch hitter in this subclass, but the big problem is the scaling. You cannot apply runes to your panoply, your reflavored daggers, and they only scale up to +1 striking at level 7. That is late. Most martials will have +1 striking weapons halfway through level 4. By level 5 to 6, you definitely need those weapons, and even Gishy casters will start having those weapons by that point. You're not getting them until level 7. And then there's another delay that happens between levels 11 and 13, where other martials have +2 striking and then +2 greater striking, and then you'll catch up, and then a similar delay later on until level 19. This is not good, unfortunately. This effectively means that your panoply is kind of a glorified returning rune on a weapon that's not even scaling as fast as another weapon. In fact, you can directly compare this to Bloodseeking Blade, and at level 7, you realize how much better the Bloodseeking Blade is, because it gets a free returning rune alongside getting the critical specialization effects of the dagger, and it got to scale that dagger as a +1 striking weapon through levels 1 to 6. Perhaps they had the returning rune on there before the Bloodseeking Blade gave it to you. You got rid of it, replaced it with a different rune by level 8, and you can keep scaling it at normal pace. You don't have to delay yourself like the Panoply. And you deal extra damage on your strikes with your reinforced benefit. All in all, unfortunately, this subclass is just not it. I think it needs heavy changes to be worth playing. I'm not even sure it's a decent pick for your second subclass that you get at level 11, because I would almost always pick Chemist Vials over Panoply, or Bloodseeking Blade and the last subclass that I haven't talked about yet. Whichever one of those I didn't pick at level 1 is always a good pick at level 11 too. So there's really no reason to pick Panoply, and that is unfortunate because it is thematic and flavorful. This is the Slayer that feels most like a Belmont if you don't want to play, say, a Thaumaturge, and it's falling short of the fantasy. So I hope they make some changes in the final release. And finally, we have the Warded Male, which I think might be the best subclass. Remember when at level 1 I said all of the subclasses get something aside from their initial benefit and slaying technique? Sometimes it's a ribbon, like with the alchemical crafting. Other times, like the Bloodseeking Blade, it's something that inherently doesn't have too much value, but brings a lot of value because of the feats that reference it. And then Warded Male just gets a great benefit in a vacuum that needs no referencing. It gains heavy armor proficiency. And as you'll see with the feats later, it actually gets things that take away some of the downsides of heavy armor. So you will just have a great armor class in this subclass if you want to. Your initial benefit is that any physical damage your Quarry deals, you have resistance equal to 2 plus the armor's potency against that damage, which is fantastic. And when you reinforce the armor, you get resistance equal to 1 plus half your level against one of the damage types the trophy could deal. I don't know why the resistance number is different for these two different parts of the initial benefit. I think it should be the same for both, just for the sake of easy tracking. These passive benefits are great. Quarries, like I said, are mini bosses and bosses, which makes them more dangerous. This resistance will be nice. You can be up in their face with a two-handed weapon and resist a lot of the damage they do. And if you choose your trophy well, you can resist a lot of the non-physical damage you might be taking throughout the day, but we're not done. The slaying technique is fantastic, arguably the best of the slaying techniques of any of the subclasses. It's a one-action, raise a shield with your armor. Now, you can't shield block with your armor, but you gain your circumstance bonus to AC and to reflex, with the only criteria being you cannot move after having done this. This is pretty damn fantastic. You're already going to have heavy armor proficiency, which means you can have the highest AC compared to any Slayer, and you can raise a shield while still holding a two-handed weapon, and you trade off the ability to use shield block, but you gain the ability to have a benefit against reflex saves. All around, just really great option for you. And as a slaying technique, it has the Relentless trait, which means your fourth action can be used to raise a shield on a lot of your turns. So this is going to feel like a free bonus to your AC. This might end up feeling like one of the tankiest classes in the game, aside from like the usual suspects like the Barbarian and the Guardian. And we're not done. These are just the level 1 benefits. At level 7, you also gain armor specialization, and the initial benefit affects all the damage your quarries will deal, not just physical damage. And this scales disproportionately well for the same reason Champion Reaction does. At high levels, enemies don't just deal physical damage with their strikes. They often have 1d6 fire damage or spirit damage or whatever else. And you're going to resist each of those damage types individually. Now, all of that is subject to the fact that there is going to be an errata for weaknesses and resistances. I talked about that in my errata review video linked above. So if that changes and resistance to multiple damage types no longer works in that way, this will become a little less good, but it's still good. It's like you now don't just resist the dragon's claws, you will also resist its breath weapons. All in all, I think Warded Mail is the best of the subclasses. You can raise a shield despite having a two-handed weapon. You have all of these various resistances. You have armor specialization. And then at level 11, you just go to Blood-Seeking Blade and pick up their damage steroid, and you have an additional 2d6 on top of what you could already do. So I think Warded Mail is the best subclass, followed closely by Blood-Seeking Blade. Then Chemist Files is alright and needs a few changes, and Consecrated Panoply is bad enough to not be worth picking as even a secondary subclass. Next, we'll talk about subclass-specific feats. So this video turned out way longer than I anticipated. While I was editing it, I realized it was gonna be about an hour and 15 minutes, maybe hour and 30 minutes if I went back and spliced everything down really aggressively. I didn't really want to do that. I kind of liked how I was ruminating on my thoughts with this, and this is a complex class, so I wanted to give you a real look at it. So this video has covered all the topics you've seen so far. The next video will cover subclass-specific feats, feats that grant you more tools to use that are not just your signature tools, and it will cover my overall thoughts on the Slayer. What I love, what I would like to see tweaked, and what I would like to see overhauled. I apologize for abruptly cutting this video, but I will try and get the second part out as soon as possible. If you like this comment, please like and comment. If you'd like to see more content in the future, please subscribe to my channel and click the notifications bell. And if you can, please join a channel membership. It's a great way to directly support me and earn a few perks out of it. Otherwise, I'll see you next time with part 2 of this video. Mathfinder out.